Hello, and welcome to Your Vote Counts, a public informational service program bringing Oregon Secretary of State primary 2020 election interviews to you. This is produced by Capital Community Television via remote technology in collaboration with the League of Women Voters of Oregon and the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk counties. For this race, all candidates were invited and all accepted. Candidates did not receive the questions, which were developed by the League of Women Voters, ahead of time. The candidates were asked to prepare a 3-minute statement telling about themselves, their qualifications, and their vision for the office if elected. I'm Toma Cadu from the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk counties, and I would like to introduce Mark Hass, who's running for Oregon Secretary of State, who will now begin with his opening statement.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here. I appreciate you engaging the candidates in this important election. These tough times that we're in now have focused a spotlight on our leaders. Are they decisive? Do they know what they're doing? Are they doing the right thing? It's one thing to lead when everything is going great, the economy is booming, people are working, the future is bright. It's quite another to lead in tough times when things are terrible. In tough times, you not only need to know how to make difficult decisions, you need to understand what people are going through. I've been tested in these tough times, in the recession of 2002 and again in the Great Recession of 2009. People were losing jobs, they were losing their homes. I remember an emotional conversation with a software engineer who was at the end of his rope. His 39 weeks of unemployment had run out, he needed an extension, his home was in foreclosure. He needed to know that people still believed in him and that he had a future. And in his driveway, in front of his house, I told him, yes, I believed him. And I got his employment benefits extended. I let him know that we will all get through this, and we did. Oregon came back from those tough times, but there were painful decisions to make about budgets, about getting people back to work, all while keeping state government running. Universities, prisons, our public schools. I responded through these tough times also with the passage of 2 rainy day funds, which will help immensely for Oregon in the next couple of years. 20 years ago, when that recession hit, Oregon had no reserves. Today, we have more than $3 billion set aside. I also helped pass a higher minimum wage, paid sick leave, and I authored the Oregon Promise, a free community college for Oregon high school graduates. The Oregon Promise has been a game changer for thousands of families. 10,000 kids a year are enrolled. More than a third of them are the first in their family to go to college. We will get Oregon moving again, and when we do, we'll need a strong Secretary of State with the know-how to keep our election secure. We'll need to vastly upgrade technology. We will need a Secretary of State to protect our vote by mail and be an ambassador to the rest of the country to adopt it. We need a Secretary of State who's not afraid to take ranked choice voting out for a test drive, push for same-day voter registration, and to lead a new era in Oregon that will no longer tolerate big money in politics. Those are big ideas, but I have a track record of getting big ideas turned into state law. My secret is working together and working hard. And that engineer, he's now a department head at a tech company with kids in college. He's back on his feet, although like all of us, he's worried and nervous in this Corona era. You've heard of wartime generals and peacetime generals. I have the experience during wartime. I've been tested and I came out stronger. Yes, we will get through this, but in these times remind us why we need experienced leaders who we know and who we can trust.
Thank you for that background information, Mark. Now let's give you an opportunity to address some questions and topics of concern to Oregonians. And let's begin with the office for which you're seeking. Of the many responsibilities held by the Secretary of State, which do you consider the most difficult?
Well, the most important is overseeing elections and election security. And this would be job one for me. I would establish and open an office of elections cybersecurity. I'm surprised there isn't one now, but there's a couple of fronts there. The most vulnerable security issue that the state has now is protection of our registered voter database. The firewalls that we have there now are merely compliant with federal law. The technology experts on my team, the people I consult with in Portland, say they are not secure for down the road, that they are our most vulnerable system we have in our state. And while we don't have a problem with vote by mail, because as we always say, you can't hack paper, we do have a problem if someone gets into our database and pulls registered voters out, and therefore they don't get our mail. So that would be job one. And also, election cybersecurity can look at this terrible haunt that we have in all elections departments in all states and really in all countries, and that is the intentional misleading of people through disinformation and misinformation. That happened twice in the Secretary of State's office in just the last election cycle. I would hire more security experts as opposed to the security experts being laid off today in the Secretary of State's office. I would hire not fewer but more experts to guard against this misinformation campaign, because people need to know the truth. I'm a former journalist, and without reporters and with the ranks of reporters declining in the state, we need to know the truth. And when rumors are on social media, we need a Secretary of State's office who's there to knock down those rumors and have a truth squad, have the tools and websites and microsites ready so people can find out what's true and what isn't, so our elections will be safe and secure.
And a follow-up to that question, which of those responsibilities that the Secretary of State holds do you think Oregonians know the least about?
Well, whenever I go and speak to groups online or in person, I always start off with kind of a Secretary of State 101 and tell them that here are the responsibilities. It is similar to a lieutenant governor. These are constitutional responsibilities. They're a little bit quirky. And I think people appreciate that, because while they may know or may not know, I think they like to be refreshed on what those responsibilities are as the overseer of all elections and campaigns, as the person in charge of business licensing compliance, the person who does redistricting if the legislature cannot do. And of course, the Secretary of State is the chief auditor of public accounts, as it says in the Constitution. And this plays to one of my strengths as a former journalist, and that's a very big operation of the Secretary of State. I think there are about 70 or 75 accountants, auditors in that office now, and that's very important. I'll be a hands-on person when it comes to state audits to protect tax dollars from Oregonians.
What criteria would you use to determine the use of Elliott State Forest as a research forest, and what impact will this have on the Common School Fund?
Well, that question is very astute, because there is no criteria now, and that's the problem. And I have been advocating for a public process so that we have a guiding light of what's important to Oregonians for these things that get into this category, which is not really defined. It's the highest permanent use. So what is that? Is that recreation? Is that ecology? Is that logging? Is that research? Really, there is no guideline. To me, we're kind of stumbling along. The land board has been stumbling along without really having to tackle these things. Not that they're doing a bad job, but there's no North Star. There's no public process to say, for Oregonians to say, yes, environmentalism is the #1 priority, economic development is #2, or whatever. And so we do all of these things case by case. And what I would like to do is have that entire land board process guided by a set of principles laid out by the public. And with respect to the sort of the next phase of the Elliott, I think that's still an unknown question of what the role will be. That's for the next legislative session to decide. But I would like to see that area, all of the old growth, put off limits to any kind of research or logging. And I would like to see that area managed better than it has been in the past.
And again, what impact will this have on the Common School Fund?
Well, the Common School Fund financially lost an asset. And in effect, the state is selling this asset to itself. And there are different schools of thought. The Common School Fund throws money off to public schools. And I've worked for foundations before, and I understand, all foundations are basically the same. You manage the assets to maximize the assets so that you can throw money off to achieve your mission. And when you have an asset that's not performing, say you have an equity, a stock, you sell your shares in IBM and because they're not performing, and you buy shares in Nike. Well, you can't do that with forests or lands or illiquid assets. And so that's why the land board was at this impasse a couple of years ago, and sort of the whole process stopped because nobody knew what to do, because they didn't know what the highest permanent use was for the Elliott Forest. Should the finances be maximized? Should it be sold to a timber company like it almost was? Because that's the fiduciary duty of members of a foundation like the land board. Or should we say, wait a second, you can't put a value on something like this, that the highest permanent use is really for Oregonians to recreate there. And so that, again, is part of the problem that I see with the land board. And the effect is the land board will no longer have this asset. It will have some funding from the state as we sold bonds to buy this, but nothing close to what it was worth. And so in the end, I think you could argue, and I think the education community will argue, that the schools, the future kids, lost out on that deal. And that's what makes it a very hard, difficult decision. But it doesn't have to be that difficult.
Thank you. Do you support an independent citizens redistricting commission? And if so, what criteria would be important to this commission?
I think it's time for an outside commission to do this job, not legislators. And I've done a lot of reflecting of this, especially in recent weeks. I've been looking at redistricting for almost 20 years, and I've looked at all the different kinds of commissions to do this. And while there are no egregious problems of gerrymandering in our political districts in Oregon, at least I don't believe there is, there is a very inconvenient truth for legislators. And that is the number of competitive seats continues to decrease. In other words, legislators from both parties redraw redistricts by essentially trading safe seats, where it's almost impossible for an incumbent to lose. This happens by mapping out districts in the redistricting process that are extremely blue and extremely red. And so the one thing that we don't have in the process now is to add competition to the list of factors that would be considered while drawing political boundaries. And then I would keep all of the other criteria that's in state law, such as communities of interest, geography, transportation corridors, and the like. But what we don't have in there is competition, and I think it's time that that be added.
Thank you. Do you support the requirement that all political advertisements list the identities and amount of contributions made by its largest donors? Why or why not?
I was one of the champions of this bill in 2019. It was the dark money bill. And it's now a state law. And I think all Oregonians support the idea of if there's a paid political message in some kind of advertising, Oregonians have a right to know who bought and paid for those ads. And we had a bad election cycle previously where that wasn't the case, and nobody knew who was saying these terrible things about people. That will all change with this new law that passed in 2019, and I was a strong supporter.
Thanks. How will you ensure that the results of state audits are available to the public and contribute to continuous improvement of government services?
The Secretary of State is the person who decides what will be audited and what will not be. And as I said earlier, I'll be a hands-on state auditor, and we will have all kinds of different criteria and what to audit and when and how to incorporate climate change and diversity into these audits. But once the auditors take off, I would let the professionals do their work, and their conclusions, whatever those conclusions are, will be communicated to the rest of the world. And I will make those as public as possible, no matter what they say. I come from the communications industry. I understand how to use a megaphone and get those out. And so I will do my best to make sure those findings are communicated to the rest of state government, most specifically, but also to the public, so everybody knows what was found. This is not an attempt to be punitive to state agencies. It's an attempt for better government. I talk to a lot of people who say, look, I don't mind paying taxes. I just want to make sure that my tax dollars are spent wisely. And I think that's one of the number one reasons we have auditors. We also have auditors, performance audits that look at the intent of the law, make sure we're all on the same page, make sure ethics are followed, make sure there's no discrimination, make sure discrimination laws are being followed and the highest standards are kept. So that's my hope for auditing. I know some of those audits just get put on shelf and nobody pays attention to them because they're not communicated, but I've worked really hard with the Secretary of State's office in recent years. We have a legislative committee on audits to make sure those are communicated and to make sure that the findings in those audits require change and that change is made.
What is your evaluation of the candidate filing programs, ORSTAR and OCVR? Do they need updating, replacement?
Well, they do. I want to be very careful here because I don't want to criticize ORSTAR or the system that's there now. Oregon has one of the toughest disclosure laws in the country, and it's awesome because of that. And I think it's a great service to the public. You can look up and see how much a candidate has spent, who's been giving it to them just 24 hours a day. The site itself is a little bit difficult to navigate. It definitely needs to be upgraded to make it a bit more user-friendly. But I'm very proud of the disclosure laws we have in this state. If we could only now add on to those laws with some campaign finance limits that I think we'll be able to do after we pass a constitutional measure in November, that would be awesome. We would have the cleanest elections in the country, and I intend to be the next Secretary of State who will usher in this new era of Oregon without big money in politics.
Thank you very much. Is there any particular area in the elections that you wish to comment on?
In the elections?
Yes.
I just think election security in this time that we're in today is the most important. And so with an Office of Cybersecurity, that's really what we need. And there will be upgrades, about upgrades, there will be necessary upgrades to make our elections more secure. And as the person who is known at the legislature for championing campaign finance reform, I think this will be another bookend to having more secure elections, more honest elections without the big money that's in there now that has been polluting politics for many, many years.
Well, thank you, Mark Hass, for our interview today and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
And thanks to Capital Community Television Media for their extensive technology and program skills used to create this presentation. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Oregon and Marion and Polk counties for question development and interviewers. And thanks to you, the public, for watching in order to become a more informed voter. For more information, please go online to vote411.org. You have until April 28th to register to vote or to make registration adjustments, including address changes. Ballots will be mailed out beginning April 29th. Postmarks are not accepted. Elections matter. Remember to vote because your vote counts.